September 24, 1945. Camp Forest, Tennessee. The morning heat arrived before the sun had fully cleared the tree line, pressing down on the compound with the particular weight of a southern autumn that had not yet decided to become autumn. 26 German women stood in formation outside the white-walled medical building, uniforms already damp, the sky above them wide and foreign and nothing like home. The notice went up on a Tuesday morning in the third week of September 1945, pinned to the wooden board outside the mess hall at Camp Forest, Tennessee, between a work assignment roster and a Red Cross bulletin about mail delays. It was a single-typed sheet. English on the left column, German on the right, as if the parallel languages might make the message easier to receive. All female prisoners assigned to Barracks C and D will report for mandatory medical examination beginning September 24th. Examinations will be conducted individually. This examination is required under Geneva Convention provisions. It is not optional. Frida Kohler read it twice, then stepped back and let the women behind her crowd forward. She was 38 years old, former state-licensed pharmacist from Leipzig, where she had managed the dispensary attached to a Wehrmacht supply depot for 3 years, filling prescriptions for soldiers who arrived with requisition forms and left with whatever she could give them, which by 1944 was rarely everything they needed and sometimes almost nothing at all. She had a pharmacist's habit of reading everything carefully before reacting. Labels, dosages, contraindications. She read the notice a second time before she allowed herself to feel anything about it. What she felt was not the fear the other women expressed immediately, in low voices that spread through the gathering crowd the way a match moves along spilled kerosene. Their fear was of violation, of humiliation, of what enemy soldiers might do to women with no recourse. She understood that fear. She did not dismiss it. Her own fear was shaped differently, more specific, more particular to what she knew and what she had heard and what she had, in the last months of the war, begun to piece together about certain programs operating under medical letterheads. She was afraid of experimentation, not because any American at Camp Forest had behaved in a way that suggested it, but because she had spent 3 years at a depot where medical officers discussed, in the flat administrative tone of men solving supply problems, research programs that generated data nobody asked too carefully about. Because the propaganda briefings in the final weeks, 2 sessions in a cold room, an officer reading from prepared text about American facilities, about prisoners used as test subjects, about doctors trained to value German lives less than laboratory results. Those briefings had attached themselves to her specific knowledge the way fear always attaches itself most stubbornly to what you already half believe. She knew the briefings were propaganda. She had known it even while listening. The way you know a poorly constructed argument is poorly constructed but cannot immediately find the words to dismantle it. She had spent 3 years watching the Reich's information become progressively less connected to the reality she observed from her dispensary window. She did not trust what she had been told, but she did not entirely disbelieve it either, because she knew what medicine was capable of when it stopped asking what it was for. She had seen that from the inside. That evening the barracks divided itself without formal discussion into 2 camps. The schoolteacher from Munich, a solid, methodical woman named Barbel who had been a primary school headmistress and who approached uncertainty the way she had probably approached difficult parents, argued with quiet persistence that the Americans documented everything too carefully to risk Geneva Convention violations. "They have filed a form for every item in my possession," she said. "They have filed a form recording that they filed the first form. These are not people operating outside their own rules." A younger woman, Petra, who had worked signals communications and who held her opinions with the particular conviction of someone who had not yet been wrong enough times to develop doubt, said that documentation was exactly how violations got covered up, that the forms were the cover, not the evidence. "My brother was in a camp in France," she said. "He said the doctors took more blood than any examination required. He said no one explained why. Blood tests are standard," Barbel said. "In Germany," Petra said, "we learned what standard medical interest in blood and heredity looked like." No one answered that. It landed and stayed, heavy and unwelcome, in the silence it made. Frida lay on her cot and listened without joining either side. The barracks smelled of sweat and the sourness of unwashed clothing pressed together in insufficient space. Outside, the Tennessee night ran with insects, a dense, layered sound she had not known before coming here. Nothing like the quiet of Leipzig evenings, something that still felt foreign after 2 months. She thought about the dispensary, about the shelves in the final months, half empty, quarter empty, then whole sections simply bare, the wood showing pale where the bottles had stood. About the requisition forms she filled in for medications she did not have and filed in the cabinet that filled up faster than it was ever emptied. About the soldier with the infected leg wound, Werner, 23 years old, who had come to her window 4 times. The first 3 times she had given him what the prescription asked for. The 4th time she had given him the last of the sulfa compound and watched him walk away and known it was not enough. He had died 2 days later. Sepsis. A hospital 20 kilometers away. She had kept working. There was no alternative to keeping working. She thought about Werner now, and about the notice, and about the examination room waiting for her on September 24th, and about the particular quality of fear that comes not from ignorance, but from knowing too precisely what medicine is capable of when the wrong people are holding it. She reached under her cot for the small notebook the Red Cross representative had distributed the previous month and wrote by the thin light coming under the door. Diary entry, September 21st, 1945, 4 days until the examination. The barracks is divided between those who believe it will be legitimate and those who do not. I find I cannot fully commit to either position. I have a pharmacist's understanding of what proper medical screening looks like. The logic of it is sound. Prisoners arrive with documented health deficits. Baseline testing is rational procedure. But I also know what medicine becomes when the institution it serves stops asking what it is for. I have filed the requisition forms for that knowledge. They are in a cabinet in Leipzig. I do not know what I will find in that examination room. I know I will not be able to refuse finding out. 2 days before the scheduled examinations, Frida was on kitchen detail, peeling vegetables in the long room beside the mess hall, when a woman named Trude, who had been at Camp Forest 3 weeks longer and carried that seniority the way a longer-serving soldier carries rank, said without looking up from her work. The woman in Barracks A with the bad knee. Ilsa. She came back from her examination walking normally. Frida kept peeling. They treated it during the examination, Trude continued. The doctor saw it and stopped and sent for someone, and they drained it and gave her something for inflammation. She walked out. Frida said nothing immediately. She turned the information over with the same care she gave to a label she hadn't seen before, reading it, checking it against what she already knew, not deciding yet what it meant. A doctor who stopped during a mandatory prisoner examination to treat an unscheduled condition, who sent for help, who used camp medical resources on a German woman's knee because it was there and it needed treating. It did not erase the fear. Fears built on the foundations hers were built on did not erase quickly or cleanly. But it sat beside the fear, and the two things did not fit together without friction, and she found that the friction itself was a kind of information. She finished the potato in her hands and reached for the next one. Diary entry, September 22nd, 1945. Trude told me about the woman whose knee was treated. Not required. Not scheduled. Just done, because it needed doing. I don't know how to weigh this against what I'm afraid of. Both things are in the room at the same time now, and I don't know which one is larger. I think perhaps I won't know until the 24th. I think perhaps that is simply the condition I am in, and I should stop trying to resolve it before I have the evidence to resolve it with. If you're enjoying the content, don't forget to like and subscribe to help the channel grow. Also, I'd love to know which part of the US you're watching from. Let me know in the comments below. September 24th arrived the way days carrying weight always arrive, indifferently, on schedule, without acknowledgement of what they mean to the people in them. Frida's prisoner number placed her 7th in the examination order. She stood in the line outside the medical building in the morning heat of Tennessee and watched the women ahead of her disappear through the door one at a time. The building was low and whitewashed, military functional, nothing remarkable from the outside. A flagpole, 2 steps up to the entrance. A small window beside the door with frosted glass. Each woman was inside for 15 to 25 minutes. Each emerged with the same expression, not traumatized, not visibly relieved, but quietly dislocated, the look of someone whose expectations had encountered something they had not prepared for. None of them spoke immediately when they came out. They moved to the side and stood in the heat, and only after a few minutes did the whispered exchanges begin. Frida watched this 6 times. The not speaking bothered her more than crying would have. Crying she could have interpreted. The silence meant something had happened that hadn't fit into the available categories. When her name was called, she walked through the door into a corridor that smelled of antiseptic and something faintly floral. A cleaning solution she recognized immediately, the same compound they had used at the Leipzig depot to wipe down the dispensary counter every evening. The familiarity of it was strange. She had expected foreignness and found instead a smell from her own work. She noted this, filed it. The corridor had numbered doors. She read the plaques as she walked. Examination room 1. Examination room 2. X-ray. Laboratory. She looked at the laboratory door and felt the fear sharpen into its most specific form. The precise, pharmacology-informed fear of a woman who knew what laboratories could be used for. And then the nurse beside her said room 3, please, in careful German, and she walked in. The room was ordinary. Examination table. Scale. Rolling stool. Instrument cabinets with glass fronts. Through the glass she saw, with the automatic inventory habit of someone who had spent years counting supplies, neatly organized rows of instruments and dressings and labeled bottles. Clean. Orderly. The particular orderliness of a facility where things were available and therefore did not need to be hoarded. The doctor stood reviewing a file. He looked up. Mrs. Kohler. He said it in German, the pronunciation careful and imperfect in the way of someone who had learned the language from a book rather than a person. I'm Major Aldous. I'll explain each step before I begin. If anything is unclear, the nurse will translate. If anything is uncomfortable, tell me immediately. He said it as a statement of procedure, not as reassurance. The distinction mattered to her. Reassurance could be performance. Procedure was what you actually did. She nodded. I'll need you to change into the examination gown. The nurse will help. Take your time. He turned away, picked up a folder from the desk, and began reading. The nurse, American, perhaps 30, with the efficient calm of someone who did this every day, handed Frida a cotton gown and helped with the ties at the back without commentary, without the invasive attentiveness that charity sometimes carries. Just practical assistance, offered and withdrawn. Frida changed, folded her uniform on the chair he had indicated, stood in the thin cotton gown and felt the cool air of the room against her arms and said, ready. He turned around. The examination was thorough and unhurried. He narrated each step before performing it, in the plain language of a doctor who had long ago stopped distinguishing between patients who deserved explanation and patients who did not, because the category of patients who did not deserve it had never existed for him in the first place. Checking lymph nodes, looking for inflammation indicators. His hands were brief and clinical. Listening to your lungs. Any history of respiratory illness? She answered. He wrote. Examining your hands, looking for vitamin deficiency markers. He looked at her hands with the attention of someone reading a document, not displaying possession. The nurse assisted, handing instruments, recording findings, saying nothing that was not functionally necessary. At no point did it become what she had feared. When it was over, she dressed again, and he gestured to the chair beside the desk. Sit. There's quite a bit to discuss. Diary entry, September 24th, 1945, afternoon. It was medicine. Just medicine. He explained every step. He turned away while I changed. The nurse was there throughout. I kept waiting for the moment it would become something else. The moment the professional manner would slip and show what was underneath. It never did. What was underneath was more professional manner. And now I am sitting with what he told me afterward, which is a different kind of thing to process entirely. Major Aldous opened the file on his desk and began without ceremony. You're malnourished. Not at crisis level. You're not in immediate danger, but significantly below healthy baseline. Multiple vitamin deficiencies. Early stage anemia. Calcium depletion consistent with prolonged dietary scarcity, which shows in the teeth and in bone density. Your lungs show faint scarring from a respiratory infection that wasn't properly treated. He paused, letting the translator render the medical terms with precision. How long were you on restricted rations? The last 2 years, Frida said. It happened in stages. You adjust to each reduction. After a while, the adjusted level feels normal, and you stop measuring against what came before. That's consistent with what I'm seeing. He made a note. Your intake file lists your profession as dispensary pharmacist. Yes. Then I'll be direct rather than simplified. What I'm describing is the clinical picture of sustained caloric and micronutrient deficiency over an extended period. Your body has been compensating, reducing non-essential metabolic functions, drawing on stored reserves, prioritizing core organ maintenance at the expense of everything else. The compensation is why you don't feel as ill as you are. The body is efficient at hiding its own decline until it can no longer maintain the performance. She recognized the description. She had read it in training materials. She had watched it arrive at her window in the faces of men who came for their prescriptions. She had not previously applied it to herself. Left untreated, he continued, this trajectory produces organ damage within 6 to 12 months. Kidney function typically shows first. Cardiac irregularities follow. He said it in the same tone he used for everything. Informational, without drama. We're going to treat it. Increased calories, B-complex supplementation, vitamin C and D, iron. Weekly weigh-ins to track progress. The dental decay will need separate attention. I'm referring you to the camp dentist. You're treating it, she said. Yes. Why? Not a challenge. A genuine question from someone who had spent years in a system where the answer to that question was always complicated. He looked up from the file. His expression carried a kind of mild surprise, as if the question itself was unexpected, not offensive, just unexpected. The way a question is unexpected when the answer seems to you so obvious it had not occurred to you that anyone would need to ask it. Because you're a patient with a documented and treatable condition, he said. That's sufficient reason. She looked at him. The Geneva Convention also requires it, he added. But honestly, the convention is the paperwork that reflects the principle. The principle is the reason. She sat with that for a moment. In her experience, principles and paperwork ran in the other direction. The paperwork arrived first, and the principle was the justification assembled afterward to explain what had already been decided. She was not sure what it meant that he seemed to believe the reverse. There's something I'd like to show you, he said. It will help explain the treatment plan directly. It will only take a few minutes, if you're willing. She said yes. She did not yet know what she was agreeing to. He stood, took a key from his coat pocket, and led her down the corridor. Diary entry, September 24th, 1945, evening. He told me I was dying slowly. Not in those exact words. He is a careful man with language, but that is what the clinical description amounted to. My body compensating, reserves depleting, organ damage in the medium term if untreated. I knew all of this pharmacologically. I did not know it personally. There is a considerable distance between those two forms of knowledge, and I crossed it this afternoon in a room with a rolling stool and a glass-fronted cabinet, and a man from Ohio, who spoke to me, as if the answer to why he was treating me was too obvious to require elaboration. I am still thinking about that. The room was set slightly apart from the examination corridor, with its own door and a frosted window that let in pale light, without a view. Major Aldous unlocked it and held the door open. The smell reached her before the sight did. That compound pharmacy smell, medicines and clean alcohol, and the faint metallic undertone of glass, that she had known for 15 years, and that in the last 2 years had become inseparable from the feeling of not having enough. The smell of a dispensary operating under rationing carries a different quality than the smell of a dispensary that is simply functioning. She knew both versions. She recognized immediately which one she was standing in. She stepped inside. The shelves ran floor to ceiling along 3 walls. Organized by category, clearly labeled, stocked, actually stocked, bottles standing upright in rows with the unremarkable abundance of a facility that had never needed to choose between patients because there was enough for all of them. Penicillin. Sulfa compounds in multiple formulations. Vitamin preparations in quantities she had not seen together in one room since before the war. Proper antiseptics. Surgical supplies. Bottles of medications she had written unavailable. Depot stock depleted on requisition forms so many times the phrase had worn a groove into her handwriting. She stood in the middle of the room and did not move. Major Aldous began explaining the treatment protocol. Dosages, schedules, expected timelines for her vitamin levels to normalize, the rationale for the sequencing. His voice was steady and informative. She heard it from a slight distance. The way you hear a conversation in another room when something directly in front of you is occupying your entire attention. She was looking at the penicillin. Middle shelf, eye level. Standard glass bottles, American manufacture, standing in a row with the simple indifference of objects that did not know their own significance. Labeled clearly. Plentiful. Available. She thought about Werner. 23 years old. The infected wound on his right leg. The prescription he had brought to her window 4 times. The first 3 visits she had filled it. The 4th time she had looked at the shelf and looked at the form and written penicillin. Unavailable, and given him the last of the sulfa compound and watched him walk away. She had known it was not enough. She had filed the form in the cabinet. The cabinet had 47 similar forms in it by that point. She had counted them once, on a slow afternoon. The way you sometimes count things that cannot be helped. Not to solve the problem, but because counting is a form of witnessing. Werner had died 2 days after his 4th visit. Sepsis. An infection that was treatable and had not been treated because the treatment was on a shelf somewhere, and the somewhere was not her shelf. She was looking at the treatment. Right there. Middle shelf. Rows of it. She became aware that she was crying in the way you sometimes become aware of weather. Not from a single moment of onset, but from realizing it has already been happening for some time. Not loudly. The quiet kind. Tears arriving without her having authorized them. Without drama. Without any of the formal permission that grief usually requests before presenting itself. Major Aldous had stopped talking. Mrs. Kohler. I'm sorry, she said. The apology out before she had decided to make it. Don't apologize. He waited. Not pressing forward, not retreating. Present. After a moment, she said. In the last year, I had almost none of this. Men came to my window with prescriptions I could not fill. She looked at the shelf. They died of infections this would have treated. I filed the forms. They went into a cabinet. The cabinet filled up. He was quiet. Then, I know what the German medical supply situation was by 44. I've read enough intake files this month. What happened to those men is not the same thing as what you did. You know that as a pharmacist. The system failed them. You were in the system. She looked at him. That doesn't make it easier, he said. I know. But it's not the same thing. It was not absolution. She did not need absolution from an army doctor in Tennessee, and would not have accepted it in that form. But it was an accurate statement made by someone who understood the pharmacology of what she was describing, who knew the difference between a dispensary decision and a supply chain failure. And accuracy, in her experience, was a rarer kindness than sentiment. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. Show me the dosage schedule, she said. He showed her the dosage schedule. October came to Camp Forest with a tentative cooling, the heat withdrawing in stages the way it had arrived, gradually, without announcement. The trees along the fence line changed color with an American abundance of red and amber that had nothing apologetic about it. Frida gained weight through October. Slowly at first, then more steadily as her body remembered how to use what it was receiving. The vitamin supplements arrived each morning with breakfast, small paper cups of tablets she identified without being told, matching each one against the deficit it was correcting with the professional reflex of someone who had spent 15 years knowing what medicines were for. The other women changed too. Not all at once, not dramatically, but in the accumulated way of bodies receiving what they had been quietly running out of, more energy on the work details, less of the bone-deep exhaustion that had become their ordinary baseline. Some noticed and said nothing, as if naming the improvement required acknowledging what it meant. Others named it openly without knowing how to carry the weight of what it implied, that they were healthier inside a fence than they had been free. Frida understood this particular weight. She had been carrying a version of it since the pharmacy. In late October, she sat on her cot one evening after the lights went down, with the small notebook and the pencil stub, and wrote something that was not a diary entry. It began, Werner, I don't know your family name. You came to my window 4 times, and I have thought about you since the first time I stood at a dispensary counter, and there was nothing missing from the shelf behind me. I have thought about you specifically when I look at penicillin, which I now see every week during the treatment protocol Major Aldous has me on, because he keeps the pharmacy unlocked during dispensing hours, and the middle shelf is at eye level. I am in a prisoner of war camp in Tennessee. I am being given vitamin supplements and adequate food and a treatment plan by an American doctor who explains everything he does before he does it, and who, when I stood in his pharmacy and cried without planning to, waited, and then said something accurate instead of something kind. I have been thinking about the difference between those two things. I am not writing to say the Americans are good and Germany was not. The world does not arrange itself that simply, and you know that better than I do. I am writing because I stood in front of a shelf of penicillin and understood, in the way you only understand the shape of a thing when you finally see its opposite, what your death cost, and what it did not have to cost. The difference between those two things is not large in physical terms. A bottle on a shelf. A decision about where supplies go and who receives them, and what a life is worth in the accounting of a system under pressure. Not a large difference in physical terms. An enormous difference in every other sense. I filed 47 requisition forms for unavailable medications in the last year of the war. I know because I counted them once on a slow afternoon. I don't know how many of the 47 had a Werner attached to them. I know you did. I am writing your name down so that it exists somewhere outside my memory. Werner. Age 23. Right leg wound. Came to the dispensary window 4 times. Died of sepsis, September 1944, at a hospital 20 kilometers from Leipzig. That is what I have to give you. It is not enough. But it is accurate, and I have learned recently that accuracy is something. Frida Kohler, pharmacist, prisoner 1847, Camp Forest, Tennessee. She folded the letter and placed it at the back of the notebook, behind the diary entries. It traveled with her through repatriation in February 1946, through the long, difficult crossing back to a continent still sorting through what it had become, through the years of reconstruction in a Leipzig that no longer looked like the city she had left, but was still, stubbornly, the city she returned to. She went back to pharmacy work. It took time to find a position in the reorganized, occupation-administered economy of post-war Leipzig, but she found one, in a clinic attached to a hospital in the Northern District, and she worked there for 22 years. She was known among her colleagues as someone who explained things, who told patients what each medication was doing and why, who treated a prescription as a document that deserved to be understood rather than simply dispensed, who kept impeccable records and who, when supplies ran short, as they did, in those early post-war years, with some regularity, tracked the deficits in a ledger with a precision that her younger colleagues found excessive. She kept the ledger because she had kept the cabinet, because 47 requisition forms had gone into the cabinet, because the cabinet had filled up and Werner had died. She kept the ledger so that the names attached to the shortages did not become just forms. Major Aldous had told her, on the final examination before her departure, that her health indicators had returned to normal range across all categories. He said it with the same matter-of-fact tone he used for everything. She thanked him. He said it was his job and extended his hand, and she shook it, and that was the entirety of the ceremony between them. On the ship back to Europe, she stood at the railing and watched the American coastline reduce itself to a line and then to nothing. The ocean was gray and indifferent and enormous. She held the railing with both hands and thought about the pharmacy shelf, about the bottles in their rows, about a system that had decided they would be there, full, available, for anyone who needed them regardless of nationality or guilt or the complicated accounting of what a person had done or not done or been forced to be part of. She did not think, Americans are better. She was too old and had seen too clearly from the inside of too many systems to believe that nations arrange themselves into better and worse with any reliability. She thought about the shelf, about the decision embedded in its fullness, about the fact that medicine, when it was medicine, when it answered to the person in front of it rather than to the institution behind it, looked a specific way, felt a specific way, produced specific outcomes in the bodies of people who received it. She had spent 3 years watching that version of medicine become impossible. She had spent 6 months in Tennessee watching it practiced without qualification on people the system had every political reason to shortchange. She carried both of those things home, not as conclusions, as questions she intended to spend the rest of her working life trying to answer correctly, one prescription at a time, one patient at a time, with whatever was on the shelf behind her. It was not enough to undo what was in the cabinet, but it was what she had. And she had learned, from a doctor in Ohio who explained things, and a pharmacy shelf in Tennessee that was simply, unambiguously full, that what you have is the only place you can start from. She started from there.